Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our 7th Fluorescent Friday event. My name is Dr. Lina Cardenas, and I'll be your host. I am an assistant professor at the School of Design at the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. Make sure you keep your cameras off and mics muted during the presentations. Please use the chat box to tell us who you are, where you're joining us from, and your affiliation with a university, company, or another organization. The Inter-Society Color Council created Fluorescent Fridays as a global platform for university students from all disciplines to network with color professionals and fellow students and to share a state-of-the-art resources about color's role in our lives and applications in the real world. If you're interested in getting involved, please check our website for more information and to learn about the benefits of becoming a member. We will love to have you joining us. Today's focus is color and emotions, a psychological perspective, featuring faculty and graduate students from the University of Lausanne in Switzerland and the University of Vienna in Austria. They will share their empirically based research about the affective meanings of color. In the process, they will shine light on research methods used to detect color-emotion associations in controlled laboratory settings. The timeline for today's sessions is 15 minutes for our guest presentations, followed by 20 minutes for Q&A breakout rooms where you can interact with the presenters. The final 10 minutes will be a summary from the breakout rooms and announcements about the upcoming events. When you choose a breakout room, please put your questions in the chat box and the moderator will call them the questions aloud. When we return to the main room, we will give an overview from the breakout sessions. And at this point, only the presenters and the host at the breakout rooms will have their cameras on. So get your questions ready for your Q&A breakout sessions after the presentations. We encourage you, please, to write the questions in the chat box so we can have an active chat box. Our first guest is Dr. Domicelè Jonauskaitė. I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrong. Dr. Domicelè is an experimental color psychologist studying cognitive and affective connotations of color across cultures and individuals. Her studies are based on scientifically valid approaches, allowing to validate or debunk myths in color psychology. Dr. Jonauskaitė is currently based at the Faculty of Psychology, University of Vienna in Austria, where she has expanded her research to aesthetics, art, and blindness. She has a PhD degree in psychology from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. Dr. Domicelè, welcome to Fluorescent Fridays.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see people from all over the world. It's already evening in Vienna, but we are very happy to be here. And let me start by sharing my slides. So today I will talk about the current state of research on color and emotion associations, and I will present the research that we conducted in our lab over the last 10 years. And I wanted to start with a very broad question: what is color psychology? So the basic idea of color psychology is that color has an impact on human psychological functioning, may it be emotion, cognition, attention, learning, and so on. And this idea of color psychology has become very popular in the areas outside of psychology. So therefore, I added another term, experimental color psychology. So what is experimental color psychology? Is testing claims that color has an impact on human psychological functioning. And before I go any further with my talk, I wanted to invite you to kind of be active listeners of my talks, Déborah's and Giulia's talks today, and to think how these findings and these ideas that we will present in our talks, how would you find them useful in your work, your studies, your practice, and so on. And we will have these breakout rooms at the end of the presentations where we can discuss. And we would really love to hear if anything that we told today, you would say, yes, this is really what we could apply in our work, our studies, our practice. So the idea of color psychology, as I said, has become popular in the areas outside of psychology. And often you can find various websites stating that color has an impact on humans. Colors are linked to emotions, to moods. And many of these websites exist in different languages. I'm giving you here examples. And probably you already know that the things that you can find in the popular media are often not based on scientific evidence. So we invite you to take a critical look at popular color psychology. Most of the things have weak scientific basis, as I just said. And there's also, when you look across these claims, there is often a confusion of psychological constructs. So maybe we're talking about emotions and then about well-being and about relaxation and about attention, and everything is kind of mixed in together. There's also this idea of presumed universality. Often if you read certain claims, it seems as if they apply to everyone, everywhere in the world. There is no, often there is no specification that it would apply, just to particular people in a particular country. And there is also a focus on perception. So it seems that we need to see colors in order to have these assumed benefits. So today I will touch on all of these ideas, and in particular, I will focus. I will focus on emotions as the psychological construct, and also what this whole my talk is about scientific evidence. So we must obtain the scientific evidence, but it takes and we can obtain it by designing rigorous and reproducible studies, but it takes time and effort. Yes, and today I will only focus on the link between colors and emotions, but in our lab we also look more broadly at color psychology, and there are of course other labs also who focus on similar questions. So what is the science behind the experimental color psychology? Like almost everything, we can trace back to ancient Greeks. So here we have Aristotle, who claimed that colors are a source of pleasure and delight, yet they neither corrupt us nor make us wiser. And since then, especially when psychology became a science on its own about 120 years ago, there have been over 100 empirical studies linking colors and emotions in adults. So it seems that we should know everything we need to know about this topic. However, the field lacks systematic investigations. Often there is one study done and then researchers move on to working on something else. And there are very few labs which looked at these questions in a systematic manner, meaning that the same methodology is applied over and over again in different populations, and trying to understand the link between colors and emotions systematically. So I will present today some of the studies that we've done in our lab. But before I do that, there's a very brief reminder, of course, you don't really need the slide, but I still have it. What is color? And we know that color is such a complex phenomena. We can look at colors from the physical point of view and describe them in terms of wavelengths. But of course, the visual system is extremely important in order to process these wavelengths. And therefore, we can look at colors from the physiological perspective. We can talk about photoreceptors in the eyes. We can talk about neural circuits in our brain. And then we can also talk about perception of color. So this is more the already the product of our physiological system processing the stimulus. And then we talk about colors, we not only see color, so we can talk about color in terms of linguistics, and we are studying color terms. And overall, when we put everything together, we put the perceptual experience and the color terms, we get color categories. So these are kind of abstract concepts that we hold in our minds, and we name them with color terms, but they have many different examples. Some examples are better, some examples are worse. And in our studies, and often studies in psychology, in fact, are dealing with color categories. What is emotion? Often people think that emotion has something to do with feelings, experiences, but again, as with color, we have a very rich vocabulary for emotions. And in the studies that I present you today, we mainly work with emotion terms, which we use to name these experiences. So let me present briefly the methodology that we have been using. This is the most frequent methodology, but we also used others, of course. So we started the International Color Emotion Association survey about 10 years ago. And in this survey, we work with color terms. It's an online survey, and participants see 12 color terms, and they have to decide what emotions they associate with each color term. They make associations using the Geneva emotion wheel, which I will show you in a minute. And very importantly, participants always complete the study, the questionnaire in their native language. At the moment, we have 46 languages available. In some studies, we used color patches instead of color terms, but then these studies were ran in the laboratory. So this is the Geneva emotion wheel. And on this wheel, there are 20 emotions. And these emotions are organized according to similarity. So more similar emotions are closer to each other. And then they organized on 2 axes. So we have valence axis with positive emotions on the right and negative emotions at the left. And we also have power axis with emotions of high power, empowering emotions at the top, and low power emotions at the bottom. So this tool is really great. It's based on empirical research itself. And what it allows us is to look at emotions as distinct entities, but we can also look at emotions in terms of emotion dimensions. So if you were a participant in our survey, and maybe some of you have completed it, what would you be doing? So you would see a color term. Here is an example of red, and the color term is written in black. And you would see this Geneva emotion wheel, and you would have to choose emotions that you think are associated with this color term. For example, you might think that red is associated with love. And love is a strong emotion, so you would choose the biggest circle, indicating the intensity of emotion. And maybe you might think that red is also associated with anger, perhaps a little bit less intense, so you would choose a little bit smaller circle. And so on and so forth. You would go through 12 color terms, and you can choose as many or as few emotions as you wish. We have an option, no emotion, if you don't think that this color is associated with anything. And we also have an option different emotion, where you can type a different emotion that is associated with the given color term. So currently in our survey, we have collaborators coming from over 80 countries. And our survey, as I said, runs in 46 languages, and this is what it looks in reality. So these are the different languages that we have. We have different writing scripts. We also had challenges of implementing right to left writing scripts like Hebrew and Arabic, but we have managed that. So you can probably find your native language in our survey. And let me briefly give you a couple of findings that we found in these studies. First of all, we looked at color emotion associations in terms of affective dimensions, so valence, power. And every time we created these color emotion association matrices. I will show you a few of those. So here is, maybe I will go through just to explain what you're seeing. So you have 20 emotion terms on the y-axis and 12 color terms on the x-axis. And then the square indicates the percentage of participants choosing, on average, choosing this association. So kind of the likelihood of association. The redder the square, the more participants show this association, meaning that the color and emotion are more strongly associated. And first of all, what you can see is that the top of this matrix is slightly darker than the bottom. And the top 10 emotions, they are all positive in valence. So you can see that most color terms are associated with positive emotions. We have two color terms, gray and black, that are more associated with negative emotions than positive emotions. And then there is also red, which is a very interesting case of being associated with both positive and negative emotions. So this is a summary of this finding, not only based on our survey, but many studies published in other labs, which showed that more positive emotions are associated with lighter colors and also more saturated colors. We can also look at specific emotions. So for example, we find that one of the strongest associations is between red and love. And red is also associated with negative emotions like anger and hate. And what unites these emotions is that they are all high power emotions, so empowering. Now, if we look at pink, which is in principle is a lighter version of red, it also has an association with love and different other positive emotions like amusement, joy, pleasure, but it doesn't have the negative end of associations with red. If we look at yellow, it's associated with joy, and we also studied this association in 55 countries. And if we look at the darker version of yellow, which is brown, it doesn't have the positive associations with joy, but instead it's associated with disgust, although not as frequently. Then we have association with white and relief. Black and gray are both associated with sadness, but black is also associated with fear, hate, anger, and gray is more associated with disappointment. So even if both of these colors are associated with negative emotions, there is some dissociation in exactly which emotions are associated. So the conclusion from these analyses is that most colors are associated with many individual emotions. So it's not just one color, one emotion. At the same time, most emotions are associated with many colors. So we have many-to-many associations, which are interesting and challenging at the same time. And if we think about applying certain colors to specific contexts, one or the other association might be strengthened. So, and now the question that we have is, how do color emotion associations compare cross-culturally? So the matrix that I showed you, this was actually an average across all the participants that we studied. And you can think whether it makes sense to you or not. And that also gives an indication whether there are many cross-cultural differences or not. I will present findings, which are kind of a summary of two large studies that we conducted. The first study was conducted in 30 populations and over 4,500 participants, and it's already published. And the second study has been conducted in 73 populations, over 10,000 participants, and we are currently writing it up. And what we did, one of the main analyses that we did is we compared these color emotion association matrices. So here, as I said, this is the average matrix across 30 nations that I explained to you what we are finding in it. And we have the same matrix for each country. So here's an example in Switzerland. And you can see that visually these matrices do look quite similar. So again, we find that red is associated with love, anger and hate, perhaps a little bit of shame. Pink is strongly associated with love, pleasure, joy, amusement, and so on. But we can also compare these matrices mathematically, statistically, and we can do this by running correlations. And if we do a correlation between the average matrix minus that country and the country itself, so with Switzerland, for Switzerland, we find that the correlation is 0.93. And just as a reminder, the highest correlation you can ever get is 1. That would mean that they are identical. And here we are really, really close to this number, which means that the associations between colors and emotions in Switzerland are very similar to those across the world in general. So we did the same for all the countries that we have. So in the 30 countries paper, we find that the average similarity was 0.88. And you can see these are the same correlations that I just showed you with Switzerland. They are ordered. And we have 27 out of 30 countries which have correlations over 0.8, so really high, and only 3 countries, Azerbaijan, Nigeria, and Egypt, which had slightly lower correlations, but still they are over around or over 0.7, so very high. And now when we looked at 73 populations, we found exactly the same correlation of 0.876. So by adding more countries from more diverse areas of the world, we nevertheless replicate this high degree of similarity in color emotion associations. Other analysis showed that color emotion associations were more similar when participants spoke more similar languages in terms of linguistic relatedness, and also when participants lived in geographically closer nations. But our analysis showed that language is more important than geography, the proximity. So let me give you some summary of these studies and also other studies that we conducted. So what have we learned so far? First of all, we learned that colors and emotions are associated systematically, but they are associated in many-to-many and not one-to-one fashion. We learned that color emotion associations are highly shared across the world. In some way, you could call them universal. Color emotion associations are further modulated by perceptual and linguistic experiences. And we also learned that color emotion associations have a strong conceptual component, suggesting that these associations are abstract rather than driven by direct visual or affective experience. And I haven't showed you yet the studies that support this last conclusion. So let me show you really briefly why we think that color emotion associations are conceptual. We ran these are 2 different publications from which the results are coming from. And in the first one, some of the participants saw colors, and in the other participants saw color terms. And when we compared emotion associations with the color patches versus color terms, we found a high degree of similarity. In another study, we recruited participants with color blindness. And when we compared associations between color patches in the trichromatic, so non-colorblind participants versus colorblind participants, we also found a high degree of similarity, which means that it doesn't really matter that perceptually they were perceiving slightly different colors. What mattered was the way they named these colors and which emotions they associated. So what's next? We have, of course, just started scratching the surface, and there are so many open questions for the future. First of all, we are interested in other associations with colors. And today, Deborah will talk about free associations, and Giulia will talk about color associations with mood. We are also interested in color preferences, so liking, disliking colors. And so far, we've seen that color emotion associations are not the same as color preferences. So for example, we can like colors, but associate them with negative emotions, or we can dislike colors and associate them with positive emotions, and so on. And if we think about the applied settings, like here, I have a picture of wall paint colors, we have to ask ourselves, which way are we going? Are we going with emotion associations, which are quite abstract, and choosing colors that are positive, have positive associations, or are we going with preference and choosing colors that people like, but they're not necessarily associated with positive emotions? So much more research is needed in this area. And also another important direction is the experience of emotion. I started with these popular websites claiming that colors have an impact on emotions, saying, for example, if you're in a blue room, you will feel calmer. So it assumes that you need to see the color blue, and also it changes your experience of emotion. But in fact, the studies that we conducted and many other labs have conducted, they have little to do with the actually felt emotions. They work with emotion terms. And when studies do study, when researchers do study actually felt emotions, there is quite relatively little evidence that colors can change our emotions. So more studies are needed in this area too. So if you want to learn more about experimental color psychology, you can read our blog post on Psychology Today, where Christina and I are frequently writing, writing in a popular, easier way our studies. And also we have a website called Color Experience, where we share our research, publications, ongoing projects, and collaborators. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you for all the people involved in many, many studies. And I thank my closest collaborators, Christine, Deborah, and Giulia, who are here today. And I'm looking forward to your questions after all the presentations.
Thank you so much, Domicelè, for our wonderful presentation. Before we move to our next speaker, I would like to introduce Christine Mohr, who also works with Dr. Domicelè. She is a full professor for cognitive psychology at the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. After having acquired some research experience on synesthesia, she started to focus on the relationships between color and affect. Her second research line concentrates on the psychological mechanisms of irrational beliefs, example, paranormal superstitions. She has contributed to over 100 peer-reviewed research contributions. Let's say hi to Christine, everyone.
Hi. Hi.
Okay. Our next guest is Déborah Epicoco. Déborah is a doctoral student in experimental color psychology at the University of Lausanne, Faculty of Social and Political Science, Institute of Psychology, Switzerland. Her studies are based on validated approaches, researching how people cognitively and affectively relate to colors. In particular, she focused on changes through lifespan from childhood to elderly adults. Welcome, Deborah. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Lina, for that very nice introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here tonight and to have been invited with you guys. So today I would like to talk to you a little bit about what do you guys think about when I say colors. So I'm just going to give you back a key points to remember from Domicelè, very amazing presentation, and how my work is actually based also on the work that she presented. So what do we know? We know that colors and emotion are associated systematically and many to many. So lots of colors go with lots of emotion and vice versa. And this seems to be kind of universal. Of course, they are still in some way modulated by perceptual and linguistic experience, but what we know is that we have that strong conceptual component. So the association seems rather abstract than driven by direct visual or affective experiences. So we started to wonder if they are that much conceptual, it would mean that they are kind of built in our language, how we think. So to kind of go into this and try and understand how it works, we wanted to work with free association. So what are they exactly? So free association, you can see them like kind of a window into people's thoughts and feelings. This is something very much used in clinical psychology. This is a tool that has been around since third time, so it is kind of like established in psychology. But here we want to use it in a more cognitive way. So we wonder about the semantic network models. So basically what I'm saying here is that in our brain, we kind of like to create some networks that are based on different words that we think are kind of familiar and they go together. And the more familiar the word, the more it will go together. But I'm going to give you a little example. So if I give you the word color, you might think of two things, yellow and red. And yellow might trigger something very concrete, such as the sun, but red in itself might trigger something more emotional, something that comes from an experience, something like love and anger. So you can see here a same word, color, triggers two other color terms, but then they will trigger very different things. So knowing this, thinking about this, we wonder if we can actually understand what people think about colors using the semantic network models. To do so, we started to think about the color terms that we could use, and we decided to go with the color term purple to test our idea for 3 different reasons. The first one is that purple has a lot of diverse affective meanings. As you saw with Domicelè presentation in those nice heat maps, purple tends to be that line that is a bit lighter than the other color and emotion association because people seems that they cannot decide if it's a positive or negative one. It also because it's an inconsistent basic color category. So it means that amongst color scientists, we kind of know what purple looks like, but we don't 100% agree, like you would agree what a red looks like or what a blue looks like. And then it's also because it has different cognates across language. So by cognates, we mean that depending on the language you speak, you will not have the same word root for purple. So if you take English, it will be purple. If you take French, it would be violet, here violet, if you translate it. And then if you take German language, it would be lila, so here lilac in English. So based on that idea, we created that data set. So we decided to focus on French. We're in the French part of Switzerland, so for us it was a bit more easy to get the data. And we asked very nice collaborator from France and Algeria to help us out. So we asked people to give us up to 3 different free association with 16 color terms, 20 emotion terms, and 26 philo terms. We really wanted those color terms to be kind of hidden in the middle of a lot of words. And we use 3 different French words for purple. So here we have violet, which is our basic color terms, and then 2 non-basic color terms, which are lila and pourpre. So what is that data set exactly? And how do we actually use those free association? And we make sure they're a good tool because as you can see here, I took our data set, I did a little word cloud, and the bigger words are the ones that were given the most, and the tiny ones that even I cannot read from my computer are the ones that were given the less. So we have that very diverse and big data set. So what do we do with it now? So to be able to actually treat that data, we thought a little bit further and we decided to create our own coding scheme. So we went through 3 different steps. First, we saw that we had 6 first predominant themes, like natural object or human-made object. So we created those first 6 themes. They were already kind of nice. And when we use a double coding system to see if people agreed on that coding scheme, we saw that it was working, but some words were kind of bundled together. So we saw here that we were missing something. So we had a second step where we decided to add a few other teams and combine others. So we decided to put together, for example, everything that was emotion and sensation because they are quite similar with one another. So we ended up with 9 final theme that I'm going to present to you now. Oh, and before I forget, of course, we coded everything, 2 coders, and we had a kappa of 0.848 that you can see here, which is very high because the maximum kappa that you can have is 1. So it seemed that our coding scheme is working and it's also understood outside of the people that created it. So what is that scheme exactly? So the first theme that we had is experiential, so sensory and affective experiences. So everything that will be related to emotional and sensational aspects. So if you can be warm and you can be sad or you can be happy. Then we have human-made objects. So everything that is related and created by a human. So it would be a chair, a car, for example. Then we have natural element and object. So everything that is related to nature and that you can touch. It's actually a quite concrete theme because we separate it from scenery, that we contain more abstract element of nature, such as the sunsets, spring, autumn. The point was really to see that you have natural elements you can touch, and scenery, it's everything you can point to, but is a part of your environment too. Then you have abstract concepts. So those are very high words that usually have one definition. When I give you intelligence, feminism, or Christmas, you know what I'm talking about. I do not need to explain it further. And then we have people and fictional characters. So everything that is related to people that actually exist, such as a princess, a queen, and fictional character, if you give me Batman or Spider-Man. And then we have color terms, which is everything that is actually related to colors. So people can give basic color terms, and they can give non-basic color terms. They will appear in that theme. Then we had personal. So a lot of people actually gave something coming from their own experiment. So here we decided if they say I, my, mine, it will go into that theme. And we added a 9 and last one, which is ambiguous words, because we decided to not put words in the mouth of a participant. So if it was a word that had more than one definition, such as church, orange, or school, then it would go here in ambiguous words. So having that coding scheme in head, this is what we find. I'm going to give you overall frequencies because we tested for country differences and we did not find any. Whether you come from Switzerland, from Algeria, or from France, you tend to see those free association related to purple the same. So what do we find here?
Excuse me, Deborah, 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you. So we find here that the number of free association differed between the 9th theme, which means that they are not bundled in 1 or 2 themes, where, like you can believe here in the graph, because you can see that indeed natural elements or 3rd theme and color terms or 7th theme was chosen more often than the others. But still we were able with our coding scheme to really show the diversity of our data. Then I found it was a fun fact, flower was the main chosen word for every cognate, whether you think violet, lila, or pourpre. People chose mainly violet, flower, so fleur in French. And then one last fact is that the number of free association did not differ between cognates, which means that people gave approximately the same number of words for violet, lila, and pourpre. So having those results in mind, I would like you guys to go home with 1 or 2 things. What do we actually think about purple? Well, we can see here that the psychological meaning of purple seems to be widely shared within the same language, here French, for the different presented color terms. So it seems that the basic color term does not have a more influence or is more important than the non-basic color terms. Then can we interpret and show stability of color and affect association? I think that here we can say yes, because we show the strong reliability of our coding scheme. It allows us to structure the diversity of our association data. And I can say now that we also tested it in other language and it works very well. So we are confident in it. And we can see it can be applied to a wide range of open answer when it comes to colors and what actually color means. So this is our first step to understand what is hidden behind color terms. And it seems that we have created a coding scheme that can help us structure the diversity of the mind when it comes to colors. So before I leave you guys, I would like to just give a quick shout out to my supervisor, Christine, and my mentor, Domicelè, and of course, all the amazing research assistants you can see here, without whom this work would definitely not exist. And of course, our collaborators, because we have data from France and Algeria, and it's people over there that actually collected it. So I thank them.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for that wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Our final guest is Giulia Spagnulo. Giulia is a master's student at the Faculty of Psychology and Education Sciences, University of Geneva, and a research assistant at the Institute of Psychology, University of Lausanne, Switzerland. Her research activities are twofold. Her first research theme explores cognition and affect related to colors. And her second research theme and master thesis topic is focused on couple relationships. Giulia, welcome to Fluorescent Fridays.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. Okay, so let me share my screen with you. Okay, so color and emotion associations, are they related or not? That's the topic we will be discussing today. So, okay, but first of all, let's start. Why are color and emotions important? In language and everyday life, we naturally tend to relate things to color. For example, when we say we see red or we feel blue. And overall, the internet is full of websites claiming that our personality, our mood, and our emotions can be inferred from our color choices. For example, people who like red are supposed to be action-oriented, active, cheerful, and on the other side, people who like yellow are supposed to be fun, dreamers. But are all these things true? That's the big question. So let's start from the beginning and discuss like, how can we describe colors? So every color can be unambiguously defined on a three-dimensional system. So on 3 dimensions, lightness, chroma, and hue. And just to give you a quick definition of what those dimensions are, lightness defines how light the color is. So it's very simple. And chroma is a bit more tricky because it defines the color purity, which means it's how grayish it is. Like a color with low chromaticity will appear to the left one. And finally, hue is what people usually refer to as colors: red, green, blue, and so on. And we can analyze each of these 3 dimensions separately, but we have to keep in mind that they are not independent, as you can see on the picture on the left. And this is very important. So, what do we know so far in the literature? Many things have already been shown. And for instance, one very important discovery has been done by Jonauskaitė and colleagues. And it is that when representing current mood through colors, people seem to be relatively consistent in their color choices. More precisely, the study found that fearful mood is best represented by darker and chromatic colors, such as red hues. And on the other side, a joyful mood is best represented by chromatic and lighter colors, such as yellow hues. Why is this important? This is important because this mirrors systematic associations between color terms and felt emotions: yellow, joy; red, anger. So Jonauskaitė and colleagues found that, yes, current mood can be represented by our color choices, which led us to the question this study is about, because less is known about to what extent does our current mood influence or even modify abstract color and emotion relationships. The question is, would you pick another color for red? Would you pick another color for love? Is presented as follows. So we induced 2 moods, a joyful mood or a fearful mood, through a validated mood induction procedure, which consisted of music contextualized with short emotional text. And then while participants were either in a happy or fearful mood, they had to match the color they felt best represented for emotion concepts, which were either disgust, anger, love, or admiration. And this was done on a computerized color picker, which is displayed in the figure, the part C. And afterwards, we wondered, okay, but did the mood induction was successful? We needed a way to assess this. And this is when participants could indicate their current mood choice by selecting it from 20 emotions that were retrieved from the Geneva emotion wheel. So it was a self-report. And then again, we repeated the same procedure, but this time inducing a neutral mood. So still short stories, but this time no music. Again, they had to match colors to emotion terms, and again, presenting for emotion concepts. And finally, we again verified if the mood induction was successful by them picking the 20 emotions in a self-reported way. So we had two types of design. So this means that half of the participants were induced with joy and the other half were induced with fear. But we also had within subject design that this means so all the participants were neutrally induced after being induced with 7 people. What results did we find? So we analyzed the parameters I mentioned before that are hue, lightness, and chroma. So let the results themselves. I just want you to have a quick look at the pictures I'm displaying here, because you can see that irrespective of mood induction, so no matter if we induced joy or fear, red hues, so the red circles displayed here, were the most frequent choices for both love and anger, while on the other side, yellow was the most frequent choice for admiration, and darker yellows and greenish hues were the most frequent choices for disgust. But how did we test this? So we performed chi-square with an SDR correction, and we found that mood induction did not impact color choices for none of the 4 emotions I mentioned. So not for admiration, not for anger, not for love, and not for disgust. And this is where it gets really interesting, because we found the same results for chroma. This means that mood induction here again did not impact color choices for none of the emotions. And again, same result for lightness. And what does this tell us? What does having similar results tell us is that our current affective states in the end seems to have very little impact on how we think about colors. So now I have one key message that is very important, is that color and emotion associations are stable. In fact, they are so stable, they are very, very little modulated, if not at all, by our current mood. So what does this imply? It implies that our affective representations of color are conceptual, as Domicelè presented it earlier, and not based on perceptual experience. And why is this so important? It's because it guarantees continuity in our sensory environment, which perceptual experience could not explain. And this is really the main key message that came out of this whole study. But then, what's next? So I see 2 potential future directions, which I would like to explore after my master's. We could either still keep studying short-term moods, because here we wondered, we studied color and emotion associations, but what about color and preferences associations? For example, we know that the color yellow is associated with the most emotional joy. So positive emotion. Yellow is associated with a negative preference. This means that people do not like yellow. And what practical implication does it have is that, for example, imagine you use color therapy rooms. On what would you base your choice? On the fact that people do not like yellow, or on the fact that yellow is associated with a positive emotion? These are all things we don't know so far.
Final minute.
On the other side, sorry?
It's final minute, sorry.
Oh, yeah, I'm almost done. And on the other side, we could also be exploring long-term moods, because here we worked with what is considered to be a short-term mood. So it does not last on the long term. But what having seasonal depression here, the mood would be long-term and wouldn't need to be induced. And the question here would be a similar study design, but considering, would we find the same result? Maybe yes, maybe no. And that's the end of my presentation. So thank you to everyone, and especially to my 3 supervisors that always support me in my research.
Thank you so much, Giulia, for that.
Thank you.
For that presentation. Let's thank everyone, to all the presenters for sharing this fascinating research with us. And as we move to the second part of our program, I'd like to invite all of the speakers and breakout session moderators to turn on their cameras. Our host for the 20-minute Q&A questions will be, our host will be John Zimmer and Ellen Divers. Please wave to say hello. Perfect. Breakout room 1 will have Dr. Domicelè and Déborah with John Zimmer as moderator. Then breakout room 2 will have Christine and Giulia with Ellen Divers as a moderator. Everyone should have the link for both, so you can decide which room you would like to join. After the 20-minute sessions, we will gather in the main room for the final minutes, and Ellen and John will give us summaries from the breakout rooms, and we'll give announcements of upcoming events. So stay with us. Welcome back, everyone.
There is potentially Bethany, probably contact us later again. I will actually ask that with Domicelè. I have not seen anything that would show neural activity patterns the way that you have mentioned it, but I think it's a very interesting question, because it probably helps us understanding, as you say, that chroma and lightness have a different, because the color categories are arbitrary in some way, because they are continuous. So I note that question. I think it's really interesting, but I must say I have to pass with a direct answer.
You know, I think a study that is helpful, has been helpful for me, is the Valdez and Morabian 1994 study, because they're the ones who used, you know, valence theory, pleasure, arousal, dominance, and kind of found very much what you did about, you know, darker colors tend to be more dominant, you know, and there are all these findings. And what's helpful for a designer is that they are generalizations. Mm-hmm. You know, a designer needs general guidance, not specific about a single color, you know, and so I think that's a good, kind of a good starting point. For me, it's been very helpful way of thinking about color and understanding. Yes, so.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Now I'm gonna give the word to Ellen and John. Let's start with you, Ellen, and give us the summary, a 3 or 4 minute summary of what happened in your breakout room.
Well, we had a small room. We jumped, can you hear me? We jumped right into the question of how does this apply to interior design, which, you know, is very near and dear to my heart. And, you know, I would say where we ended up is just the, you know, because we were talking about how we're on a path where I'm seeing that we're getting closer and closer to, you know, to answering those questions. And we were talking about with Christine about, you know, they have this amazing infrastructure in place right now with this study. And if they can pair up with design, people from the design field, there might be some way that they can, you know, use those ideas, but use it with their, you know, very large research project. And then, and of course, just talking about how if people wouldn't just go off and do their own studies, but really kind of come together and try to agree on a method, then that gives us a lot more confidence, you know, in the results and that kind of thing. And then there was the question from one of the participants about what I was talking about, how hue, value, and chroma seem to shape those kinds of perceptions. And she was asking whether the perception of like an intense red, you know, was that due, you know, was that more a visual perceptual phenomenon, you know, that you're just receiving a whole lot of red? Anyway, we kind of had to cut off at that point. Is Christine, do you want to add anything, or Giulia? Just
I guess I want to make the call I've done before, and we are more people now, and probably also share the words. And we had a meeting recently with an interior designer. Domicelè was there as well, and we thought about 1 or 2 ways to start thinking about how could we try to find out which colors could be interesting to look at in a more applied setting. And that would be probably more like a survey as well, what people think could be beneficial in one way or another. We have thought a little bit about it, but we felt it would need us dedicated, passionate, and project lead energy in order. We just can't run a third one, but we can do everything that we can provide: network, experience, indication, help, and so on, how to make it possible. But I say it, and Ellen, you said it also, if everybody feels now, oh, it would be fun to do something, and they do it in their country. I think our survey, the biggest strength is that it's the same method across all the languages, places, and that we used the mother tongue of people, so not to reach high school educated, computer literate, and whatever English fluent speakers, but that we could really target people in their own language. And I really feel that allowed us to have a data set that certainly will have a big value in many, many years to come. And if one thinks about moving from these very systematic word related stuff to more applied, it would need the same approach, and it would guide every question that would come up, and it would allow us to have more a priori questions that we could test in the lab or in an applied setting. So really to try to do it more in a coordinated way, I really think that is worth the effort, even if it's more, it takes some time to make sure this is, I mean, we did pilot studies. Is it understood in different languages? Can it be translated? Is it not too complicated? You know, would my grandmother understand? Well, no, I'm getting too old, she doesn't live anymore, but would my parents still be able to understand it and stuff? And that took really time. But when we were ready, we felt, okay, now we can go. And that was really beautiful.
Yeah. You're muted, Lina.
Excellent. Now, John, need the feedback of your breakout room.
Yeah, okay. I asked basically the same question that Ellen was asking, only for graphic designers rather than other fields. And the answer I got, could you repeat, Domicelè, what
Yes, I think it's very similar to what Christine was saying, is that the studies that we are doing, they cannot be directly applied to any specific field. If you want to know what's the best color for a logo, then you have to run a study for, you know, your specific subfield and find that best color. We are kind of investigating more context-free associations. So that was kind of the idea.
Mhm.
And then what Christine mentioned was, it's really beautiful to maybe make this bridge with some other people to go more applied. But a priori, we're interested in fundamental associations. And I think we also discussed the fact that there are different habits in using colors across the world. We talked that in Portugal, there is much more color used in ceramics than in Denmark or Switzerland. And yet, that said, our studies show that there is high agreement on how people associate colors with emotions. So somehow it seems that these habits of using colors not driven or not translating into our associations. The associations are much more abstract, fundamental, like kind of color symbolism.
Okay.
Any other comments? No? If that's it, I would like to thank again all the speakers and to all of you for joining us today. Please spread the word about Fluorescent Fridays and save the day for our next event in February 2023, featuring color research from the College of Optical Science and Engineering at the University in China. Thank you again for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your Fluorescent Friday.